Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and theologian in residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish, one Christian.
This week we're reading Luke 4:14-30, the story of Jesus giving his inaugural sermon at his home synagogue in Nazareth. In the Gospel of Luke, this passage serves as a kind of mission statement for the ministry of Jesus, which he envisions as fundamentally good news to the poor. This is a good measure, we think, for our own communities. To what extent is our work in the world good news to the poor, and so to what degree does it conform to the gospel of Jesus? Yet while the people of Nazareth are initially receptive to Jesus' message, he goes on to describe his ministry in light of the Israelite prophets Elijah and Elisha, who in Jesus' telling focused on ministering to people outside of Israel altogether. Understandably, perhaps, this comparison makes the people of Nazareth angry, as he seems to say his ministry has nothing for them. Why does Jesus do this, we wonder, and what does it have to say to us today? If Jesus is always pressing toward the margins, then what is the good news for those in the center? And if Jesus is constantly expanding the boundaries of inclusion, how can we remain rooted in the communities that have shaped us? Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, it's Bible Worm time.
It's Bible Worm time.
Bible Worm time.
It is.
Amy, I'll tell you that one of the hardest things for me about Bible Worm is coming up with witty banter here for the beginning of the podcast that does not actually pertain to what is currently going on in my life, because we record the podcast a little bit ahead of time. And so by the time the podcast actually comes out, things that were happening are no longer happening. And so
Old news.
Like today, we're recording this on December 20th. Christmas is just around the corner. This morning, I went to my kid's Christmas assembly at her elementary school, which is awkward because you're trying to talk about Christmas, but you're not trying to talk about Christmas because it's public school. But we're in Arkansas, so we don't really care. And so we're doing this whole little dance of the seven veils, you know? But I can't talk about that because by the time this comes out, it's mid-January.
It's mid-January. No one wants to hear about your Christmas, quote unquote Christmas, whatever thing happened at your kid's school. I know when we first started this, we were a little more spontaneous and fly by the seat of our pants and recorded very shortly before we were putting things out in the world.
Like we would record on Friday and it would come out on Sunday kind of thing.
Yeah. And now we're old and planful and don't and try not to do that. But it does make it harder to be real about the stories that are actually in our heads.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So our options are, we could go back to recording on the Friday before it comes out on Sunday. I will tell you that was very stressful for me and for my family. And I would just basically spend, and also I didn't know how to edit a podcast at that point. And so I would just spend my whole weekend editing Bible Worm, and it was sort of sad.
I don't think that's a good plan for you.
Option 2 is we can just cease caring about it and talk about what's happening in December, even though it's January.
Mm-hmm.
Option 3.
It'd be like time travel for listeners.
Yeah. Or we can just, what I usually try to do is just either talk about something that's kind of generic, or I try to imagine, what's my life going to be like in January? But that's kind of weird.
Yeah. I like that idea, though. Tell a story that you wish will be true in January, and then we'll see if it happens.
So, Amy, the regular version of this current podcast is coming out on January 12th. And so I'm curious, what do you hope your life is going to be like on January 12th?
Okay. Well, I really have no idea. I was not anticipating that question. And I wonder what you hope your life will be like on January 12th.
Well, I'm guessing it's probably cold. We could talk about that. Boy, whoo! It was cold when I came in this morning. Whoo, doggy.
We will have traveled to see our families, but we will have been home for a little bit.
Yeah?
Yeah.
My holiday travels will have been amazing, and I will have had the best visits that I ever have had with my family.
And we'll be settling back into like the, daily. We'll have eaten a lot of cheese. People eat a lot of cheese over
the holidays.
Now it's like the week of Hanukkah, but between Christmas and New Year's, it's a cheesy time.
Cheesy time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, Amy. Well, I hope
that was deep.
Future Bobby and future Amy are enjoying their January the 12th. Today, on December the 20th, our task before us, our actual task, is to read Luke chapter 4, verses 14 to 30. This is the story of the sort of inauguration of Jesus's ministry, which takes place kind of famously in his hometown. We've had just a little bit of text between where we ended last time with the baptism of Jesus and this time. Mm-hmm. And so what do we need to know to bridge us from where we were last time to where we pick up today?
Well, in terms of the plot, what has happened is just this minor episode where, Jesus is tempted by the devil, as happens sometimes. It happens
from time to time.
Yes.
It may have happened between now and January 12th. And who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. It tells us that Jesus is full of the Holy Spirit and then is promptly led by the Spirit into the wilderness where he's tempted by the devil for 40 days.
It is true.
And so that temptation is recorded in a way that sounds to me a little bit like, I don't know, sparring, like the devil sort of puts out this idea and then Jesus has some response about why he should not do that based on his tradition, based on his Jewish teachings. And eventually the devil gives up, but it does leave us this little, spoiler, this little irritant in the system. Yes, the devil leaves him alone until a more opportune time.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, dun, 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 indeed. Mm-hmm. Plot-wise, that is what's happened.
I think that's so interesting that, just that little notice of, the devil, even if you're Jesus and even if you best the devil in a spar, devil's still looking for an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think we've probably talked about that maybe last year or sometime on the podcast where Jesus' baptism leads straight into the temptation, basically, and that idea of being inaugurated into a life that is alternative to the empire leads to sort of these conflicts with the devil. And that sort of concept is really interesting to think about.
It really is. Yeah.
Amy, the other thing that happens in this little space between our texts it's kind of boring to read is the genealogy of Jesus. But it's sort of interesting.
Genealogy. It is interesting.
Yeah. The way Luke tells the genealogy starts with Jesus and it goes backwards through time, counting his lineage through Joseph, who is his sort of legal family. And it goes back, to the people you expect, like David and Abraham. And then it goes all the way back to son of Adam, son of God, which I just think is kind of cool because, in the biblical framework, you and I are also children of Adam. And so in that sense, we are also children of God in the same way that Jesus is said to be son of God here. I think that's kind of cool. Jesus, of course, has also been said to be son of God in a totally different way.
And he was just said, not to be son of God, like that phrase in particular, but it reports this, you are my son, the beloved. And then to have a genealogy that goes through biologically through Joseph, who is not biological, we all see sort of the tension there, but to have it traced back to Adam as the son of God is really, I think that's wicked cool.
Yeah. And those two stories back to back, as you're saying, you are the son of God and y'all are all, it's not saying y'all are all sons of God, but it's a very clear implication of it is are all sons of God. So we're connected to Jesus in that one way. All right, Amy, our text for today is Luke chapter 4, verses 14 to 30. And this is the story of Jesus returning to his hometown. And I am picking up in verse 14, reading the Common English Bible. Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and news about him spread throughout the whole countryside. He taught in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. Jesus went to Nazareth, where he had been raised. On the Sabbath, he went to the synagogue as he normally did and stood up to read. The synagogue assistant gave him the scroll from the prophet Isaiah. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to liberate the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." He rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the synagogue assistant, and sat down. Every eye in the synagogue was fixed on him. He began to explain to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled just as you heard it." Everyone was raving about Jesus. So impressed were they by the gracious words flowing from his lips. They said, "This is Joseph's son, isn't it?" Okay, Amy, this text is very specific about its geographic location. I think we've talked a little bit maybe already about Galilee, but can you just give us a little reminder of like where Galilee is and what kind of place it is?
Well, I'll tell you what I remember, and then you can help me fill in here. But Galilee is in the northern area in Israel. I think you have described it as sort of like flyover country.
Yeah.
It is not, we are not in Jerusalem. We are not in a sort of city center. And Nazareth is pretty much in the center of it. Like it's not coastal. It's really like flyover country.
The city of Nazareth itself is kind of geographically central, as you were saying. It's about maybe 20 miles from the Mediterranean, which is to the west, and 20 miles from the Sea of Galilee, which is to the east. It was a small agrarian village. It was not populated actually during the time of the Kingdom of Israel. It came into being sometime maybe in the 3rd century. It was a little farming village. I think estimates are that maybe there were like 400 or 500 people living in Nazareth at the time. So I don't know other than to envision like small town agricultural flyover country. That's where we are.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the action in this section takes place in a synagogue. Can you talk to us a little bit about synagogues and what they are and what they aren't?
You know, it's kind of I think it's a funny is a weird word, but like period in Jewish history, because if we were, if the first temple were still standing, when the first temple was standing, the only way that we really know that people were sort of engaging and sort of seeking out particular intimacy or connection with the divine was through temple ritual.
Yeah.
And then that temple was destroyed, and people had to start to figure out some other ways of gathering and coming together and studying or exploring this idea of prayer. What could prayer be in the interim? But then another temple is built.
Right.
And so now they're sort of existing alongside of each other. So the way that I'm not an expert on this period of time, but the way that I think of synagogue gatherings at that time was it was a place of gathering, a place of study, of reading these texts and exploring them, and probably not a lot of formal liturgy at that point. I think that was just sort of coming into being a little bit, but most of that happened after the second temple is destroyed. So I think of it more as sort of a house of community and house of study.
Yeah.
Where people would especially be on Shabbat, because you want to be engaging with these texts on Shabbat,
right.
But not like a modern synagogue.
Oh, that's so helpful. And, to me, one of the things that my students sometimes get confused about is synagogues were it's almost like a community center or something like that. Mm-hmm. But there was never a sacrificial system that was conducted at synagogue. I mean, you say never, like maybe some random dude did one time, but you're not supposed to be doing that.
No, don't do that.
So the temple was the place of priestly worship through the sacrificial system. Synagogues were houses of study, houses of public gathering, maybe houses of prayer at various points. We saw that text where Daniel was praying when he was in Babylon. So maybe people did things like that. but never the formal sacrificial liturgy taking place in the synagogue.
Yeah, for sure.
In that little first part, we get this notice that Jesus was going around teaching and being praised by everyone. I don't know that there's that much to say about that, but by the time he gets to Nazareth, he's already been doing something that's captured in those first two little verses. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be going around to all different synagogues and participating in the life that's happening there in really meaningful and invigorating ways. Like he's teaching, he is inhabiting the tradition really powerfully, and people like it. You know, we pointed out, I think it was the last time we were together, just how much Jesus in his youth, his babyhood and his youth is really inside the structures of Jewish community. And I think that's still really true in this part. There's no space, there's no sunlight between Jesus and the Jewish community here. Like everyone loves what he's doing. He's going to synagogues and teaching. It's good.
So then he comes back to his hometown in Nazareth and goes to synagogue. I mean, this is just an active imagination, but I'm just like going back to your hometown, to your synagogue. That's a certain kind of a thing. Can you talk about just what do you imagine that experience was like for Jesus or for the people who had grown up with him, seeing him back there, you know?
Yeah, going home is weird. And I think going home after you have been on this, I want to say this is such modern language, but this trajectory of growth and real, your name precedes you in some way, like your reputation. Yeah. It's a funny thing to go back home then. And at least for me, when I go back home, I feel a little bit, at least like I'm in dialogue with my childhood self. If not, I'm actually back to my childhood self. I think it's important to me that it says it says he goes back to the synagogue in Galilee, as was his custom.
Yeah.
So actually, I guess I wonder whether that means that was his custom when he lived in Galilee, or that was his custom at the time because he was going to all these other synagogues, or in some ways what he's doing feels like it is in continuity with who he has been in the world. It seems like he's not going to make a point of things. He's just going because he goes.
Yeah, that seems like that's what he does. Yeah.
Yeah.
When he goes to other places, he speaks there. And so when he goes to his hometown synagogue, he's going to speak there. I think we imagine that in this synagogue practice, different leaders of the community would give teachings. And, so Jesus I don't think he's the singular one who's doing this, everyone's sort of deferring to him, but he's part of this sort of ongoing conversation, participating in the way that you do in the local synagogue.
Yeah.
It is a little bit like, Jenny from the block, where you're you have blown up and become famous, and now you're just back being yourself.
Yeah.
We've seen a little bit of this tension already, actually, between Jesus, who has this greater calling, and Jesus, who's from Nazareth. We saw that a couple of weeks ago when, 12-year-old Jesus at the temple, and we felt that little tension between Jesus, the son of Joseph, and Jesus, the son of God, and how are those going to relate? And I think that's coming back to us a little bit in this text.
Do you imagine that the people in his community have heard about him? Because, there was no Instagram. Do you imagine that they know that he is loved and celebrated?
I would think so. The only reason I say that is because in verse 14, it says news about him spread throughout the whole countryside. So it seems like people are talking in the way that you talk, hey, have you heard about this Jesus guy?
Fair.
What he's doing? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So on this particular day in the synagogue, he is handed the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. I assume that this is some sort of reading practice in which that was the text. It's like the narrative lectionary of the first century, right? That here's the text for the day, or here's the scroll for the day. Mm-hmm. Or do you think Jesus is just, I don't know, I guess I've always wondered whether he's picked out this scripture for himself or whether it happens to be the scripture for that day. I don't know how we would know.
It's a good question. I don't know how. I don't know enough about the details of what was happening in synagogues at that point.
I don't think it was very standardized at that point in history.
I mean, it does say the scroll of Isaiah was handed to him.
Yeah.
So I guess I tend to think it wasn't that he went in saying, like, sort of totally from the outside, I'm going to bring this text from Isaiah. But I don't actually know that.
That's the way I read it too, is that at the very least, Isaiah was the scroll for the day. Yeah. Maybe Jesus picked out the actual passage, or maybe that was the passage for the day, and he sort of went on his own. Like, he went sort of knowing that was the passage for the day, and so he has a sermon in mind. Yeah. The passage is this passage that is very familiar to us. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and so on. Can you just talk to me a little bit about what that passage is?
Yeah, we have an episode on that passage in its original context.
Yeah, just from a couple of weeks back.
It's from Isaiah 61, and you should listen to that episode. No, and in that context, it seems like the prophet himself is speaking a good word to the people in lots of different ways. Some ways that seem to be related to justice that humans can carry out, release of the captives or letting the oppressed free, and some in ways that you would need some kind of divine intervention, like recovery of sight to the blind. Mm-hmm. We tied it, I think, in that episode to the idea of the Jubilee year, but it's an incredible and inspirational text where it sits in Isaiah.
Yes, it is more or less Isaiah 61, 1 and 2. It's not exactly Isaiah 61, 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. And the way that Jesus seems to be engaging it here, the way it's positioned in Luke, it almost seems to me like Jesus' mission statement. Like if you were an organization and you were trying to come up with your, like, what is the mission statement that's going to guide the rest of our work together? To me, that's what Jesus is doing right here. He's taken Isaiah 61. So the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Like Jesus is saying, this is about me. And then what he's doing is preaching good news to the poor, release to the prisoners, recovery of sight to the blind, liberation of the oppressed. And the Jubilee year, which we have talked about in that episode earlier, as really a time of like almost an economic reset in which everybody gets their land and given back to them and their debts forgiven. And Jesus says, that's what I'm about. So to me, that's really important. And just to sort of thinking about how is Luke's Jesus thinking about himself is fundamentally what his ministry is good news to the poor. Mm-hmm. If you go back and look at Isaiah 61, it is not exactly Isaiah 61, 1 and 2.
Does Isaiah 61 have the recovery of sight to the blind?
It does not have recovery of sight to the blind.
As I was reading that, I was like, I don't think that was in Isaiah 61. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it does have binding up the brokenhearted, which Jesus does not quote here.
Interesting.
And it also, after proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, it continues on, and the day of vengeance of our God. Mm-hmm. And so Jesus has he's massaged Isaiah 61 a little bit. Or Luke has. Somebody has.
Somebody has, yes. Mm-hmm.
Let me just ask you, what does the inclusion of sight to the blind, wherever Jesus, does that change your sense of Isaiah 61?
I mean, I think it to me, as we talked about when we were reading Isaiah 61, one of the things that was so compelling to us about that passage is if you continue, the actor switches over to the people that the prophet is talking about. Yeah. Like they will be empowered to do the people will do the things, and they need the word of the prophet, but the people are able to do the things. Mm-hmm. We can't. Recovery of sight to the blind sounds more miraculous to me.
Yeah.
And so whereas maybe we could bind up the wounds of the brokenhearted, or however it's put in Isaiah. Yeah. Recovery of sight to the blind seems like there's something else happening. There's a different kind of partnership.
I like that Jesus leaves out the vengeance of God.
Yeah.
Here, I'm just like, he just stopped reading, before that line. But I kind of I'm like, thank you, Jesus. Like, I'm glad that's not proclaiming vengeance is not Jesus's point. It's proclaiming healing and liberation and restoration. Is there anything you want to say about Jesus' choosing or reading of that passage in particular?
Well, I don't know if this counts as a reading of that passage in particular, but I want to draw out one thing that happens right after that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is his statement that, in my translation, today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing.
Yes.
And someone in the Bible Worm Collaborative, Peter in the Bible Worm Collaborative, really helped me see this differently, this sort of sense that because you heard it, it is fulfilled or it can be fulfilled. Like this sort of active sense of like, it's not just you are witnessing the fact that now Jesus has fulfilled it and it's fulfilled, but that there's something about it feels a little more collaborative. Like it has that community piece involved that maybe I was missing from the latter part of Isaiah 61, that we can see some of that in here. And that felt really rich to me.
Oh, I really like that a lot. So in that way that Isaiah 61 sort of transitions from the prophet to the people, you can read this as sort of Jesus inviting in the hearing and then enacting of this.
Yeah, in the hearing of it, you are participating.
I love that.
And making it real.
So we're not just reading like, hey, Jesus is going to do all this stuff, but Jesus is
watch. Yeah.
extending an invitation. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Now, I sometimes have heard this passage interpreted as Jesus said, hey, y'all, that guy in Isaiah 61, that's me. And then the synagogue people got really mad about that. But that's not actually the way this story goes.
That's not what happens in here.
Jesus says, that's me. And they all are raving about Jesus and they're so impressed with him.
They're amazed.
Yeah.
They're amazed. Yeah.
So this is not offensive to them to hear this. This is like, they're excited about it.
Yeah. There's no problem. There's no problem yet.
The one thing they say really is, this is Joseph's son, isn't it? Or isn't this Joseph's son?
Yeah.
And like, there's all sorts of tones.
There's so many tones you could read that in. Yeah.
How do you receive what they have said there? Like, what do you think they're after?
I mean, I guess because of the sentence that comes before it, so we know that they are amazed and they find these words to be gracious and good. Like, I'm inclined to believe they have a good feeling in their heart when they say it.
Yeah.
I see it as a sort of like pride and disbelief. Like this is one of our people. Like we watched him grow up, like that sense of sort of full-heartedness when you see the children that you've watched their whole lives grow to be incredible people. Like I see it really as, nachas is what we would call it in the Jewish world, like a really full-hearted amazement. But some sense that you're connected, you have a connection to the wonderful thing that's happening.
I like that way of reading it. I think that's the way I read it too. And, being like at my church in Clemson where I grew up, people will come back who have gone on to do some pretty amazing things. Or when you teach at a place like Hendrix, our alums will come back who have gone on to do some pretty amazing things. And this is what we say, like, wow, like we know them, like they're part of our community. And it's all about like, look what they have become. Like, it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. And it reflects well on us, that somebody from our community can be that kind of person.
Yeah.
Now, one might expect that Jesus would accept their flattery and go have lunch at the Shoney's and and it'll all be good. But that is not Jesus's approach.
No.
Hi, everyone. It's Bobby here. This month, Bible Worm has a special offer just for you. If you've ever thought about joining our Patreon, now is the time. For the month of January, we're giving all our subscribers access to the full range of Bible Worm features. If you join now at the Bible Worm supporter level, you can get early access to episodes, weekly worship liturgies, and video Bible studies, all for just $4 for the month. If you've ever wanted to try out our Patreon, now's the time. We hope you'll join us. And now, back to this week's episode. This next little bit of this story, this story is told in Mark, I think in Matthew as well, but they don't include this little vignette in those gospels. So this is unique to Luke, picking up in verse 23. Then Jesus said to them, "Undoubtedly you will quote this saying to me, 'Doctor, heal yourself. Do here in your hometown what we've heard you did in Capernaum.' He said, 'I assure you that no prophet is welcome in the prophet's hometown. And I can assure you that there were many widows in Israel during Elijah's time when it didn't rain for 3.5 years and there was a great food shortage in the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to a widow in the city of Zarephath in the region of Sidon. There were also many persons with skin diseases in Israel during the time of the prophet Elisha, but none of them were cleansed. Instead, Naaman the Syrian was cleansed.' When they heard this, everyone in the synagogue was filled with anger. They rose up and ran him out of town. They led him to the crest of the hill on which their town had been built, so that they could throw him off the cliff. But he passed through the crowd and went on his way." So Jesus, instead of accepting their praise, he quotes something to them as undoubtedly you're going to say this, even though they haven't said it.
They have not said it. No.
And it's this thing about do here in your hometown what we heard you did in other places. Can you help me think about what Jesus is up to right there? Why do you think he does that?
It is a little mysterious to me. Mm-hmm. And I feel like here's my best attempt at like armchair psychology, which is the best I can come up with. That he does feel a connection to the people of his hometown and assumes that they have certain expectations of what that connection should look like. And so he can see down the road that pain is coming because he is not going to be able to fulfill all their expectations or is not going to.
Yeah.
So he just jumps right to the end of the story. Like he's like, we're going to rip off the Band-Aid right now. Like, this is what I think you're ultimately going to want from me, and I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
It's very jarring because the people haven't asked for anything.
Yeah.
And he just says, like, I know you're going to want this and I'm not doing it. And he starts something.
He kind of picks a fight right here.
Yeah.
In ways that, Jesus is an insightful guy. And so maybe he has interpreted them correctly. Maybe this really is kind of what's going on beneath the amazement, is this kind of like, maybe this guy can do something for us and not just, isn't this guy wonderful?
Yeah.
But Jesus has also been, we don't get it narrated here, but we get it narrated elsewhere in the gospel. Like, people are always coming to Jesus because they think he can do something for them. And he often responds quite positively to that. Here he's imagining it and responding really negatively.
Bobby, can I ask, I think I'm embarrassed to have this question, but I have it. What has happened in Capernaum? Did it happen in this gospel? What did I miss?
No, that's so interesting, Amy. Yeah, because this passage is placed elsewhere in Mark's gospel, which seems to be the original. And so in Mark's gospel, by the time you get to this passage, Jesus has been doing stuff in Capernaum. Luke has taken a story that occurs a little bit later in Jesus's ministry in Mark, and he's moved it to the beginning of Jesus's ministry to make it be the like starting point. And that little bit about Capernaum is the sort of clue that he's done that. But the reason that he does it is also really interesting. Like, why would you take this story and make it really the first? Like, this is really the first thing Jesus does after his baptism and temptation. We'll come back to this question, but Jesus goes from that moment. I'm sure you're going to say this to me. He goes into these two stories. The first one is one that we read together a couple months ago about the widow at Zarephath. Can you just remind us about that story a little bit?
Yeah, so Elijah is sort of in hiding from a king and where he has started a big fight. and there's a drought in the land, and Elijah is starving, and God eventually sends him to this widow who is outside of Israel, and so is in every way like pressed to the margins. She is a widow during a drought. She is outside of Israel, and God says, this widow is going to take care of you. And when Elijah arrives there, she says she is quite close to death. She and her son have really no food. They can't even take care of themselves. And Elijah says, don't worry about it. Just bake me a cake. I mean, he doesn't quite say it like that, but he kind of does. He says, don't worry about it. Take care of me and everything's going to be okay. And quite miraculously, it is.
When we talked about that passage, we noted that, she's a Phoenician. She's in Sidon.
Yeah.
And God very explicitly sends Elijah to Sidon, to this widow. He has to go. He actually has to go across Israel from where he started out in the Wadi Cherith to get to her. Mm. And we noted that it was so interesting that God sends him to an outsider there. The second story here is related to Elijah's protege, who is very confusingly named Elisha. Mm-hmm. And it's the story of Naaman, the Syrian. We have not read that story together. Can you just fill us in a little bit about what that story is?
If I recall correctly, Naaman the Syrian was a military leader.
Yeah, he's a general, yeah.
And has this terrible skin affliction, and Elisha heals him. Elisha is one of these miracle-working prophets, and that's what else do we need to know of that story? That's what comes to mind.
I mean, that's the gist of it. Naaman is a Syrian general. He's a foreigner. He hears about Elisha from an Israelite girl. And Elisha tells him to dip in the Jordan. And he says, I've got good rivers in Syria. Yeah. Like, why don't I just go there? And he gets all in a huff and he starts to go home. And his advisors say, no, like, this guy just told you to do this really easy thing. Like, why don't you just do it?
Why would you go all the way there and then refuse to do the thing?
Yeah. And so he does it and he's healed. And that's basically the story. Yeah. So here we have a story of a foreign person with a skin disease who is healed by Elisha, and a foreign woman in Zarephath who is sustained by Elijah. So can you just talk to me about why you think Jesus tells these two stories in this moment?
I think he is responding to an unspoken assumption that he should be primarily in service to the people Israel, or even more specifically to the community that raised him.
Yeah.
And so he's pulling out these other examples to say that's not always how it works. And in fact, that is not my mission.
It's interesting because he exaggerates a little bit where he says Elijah was sent to nobody but this woman in Zarephath, and Elisha healed nobody of skin diseases but this Syrian. Like, Elijah and Elisha both did a lot of good stuff in Israel too, but they also did this stuff for outsiders. But Jesus is exaggerating a little bit the outsideness. So yeah, I think that's right. Jesus is somehow saying, like, you don't get to own the special stuff that I can do in the same way. And this is not new for Jesus. This is the way it's always been in Jesus's interpretation. Even those prophets of old also went to outsiders. What are the implications of that, do you think, for how Jesus is wanting them or us to think about his ministry?
I think the implications of it are, don't think about what it can do for you. Think about what it can do for, don't be happy about it because it can help you or your community or your, but think about how it can be helpful to some kind of bigger picture that maybe you don't understand, that something can be good, capital G good, without having some immediate bringing some immediate ease to your own life.
Yeah.
I feel like that's how it's pressing.
Yeah. In this cycle of the narrative lectionary, reading this passage in that context, it's reminding me of the book of Jonah, in which God shows mercy, you remember, to the Ninevites. Mm-hmm. And Jonah's really mad that God would be merciful to the Ninevites. And there's some message going on there that God's mercy extends to people beyond your community. But in that passage, the characteristics of God, compassionate and merciful, oriented toward the Ninevites, we also read those same characteristics oriented toward the Israelites in that Exodus 32 text, where God wants to destroy Israel in the wilderness because of the golden calf. And Moses says, you're compassionate and merciful. And God says, you're right, I am. And so God's compassion and mercy can operate inside the community and outside of it. I think that's what Jesus is up to here. But he's afraid that people are going to be like Jonah, who says, I don't want it to operate outside. And so Jesus is saying, fine, then it's not going to operate inside either. I think he's overstated the case a little bit. His point being like God's mercy extends in the community and beyond. But when you try to hold on to it tightly for yourself, then it's going to go elsewhere. Something like that.
It's just so hard because that whole side of the argument is not articulated. It's almost like Jesus has set up a straw man of this is what I think you're going to say, and I'm going to fight back so hard against it.
Yep.
But they didn't say that.
Yep.
So it does make me wonder, I love what you're saying, and I wonder if we should read into this. Of course, there is also all of this sort of mercy that will happen within the people Israel, but Jesus is just pushing on the other side because he assumes that his audience is pushing on the first side, that he's trying to balance something out, but we don't hear the side, so it winds up feeling unbalanced, really only oriented towards the outside.
Now, I appreciate your saying that way. When you read the Gospel of Luke, most of Jesus's ministry in the Gospel of Luke takes place within the Jewish community, not necessarily in Nazareth, but in Galilee and among his people. And so it doesn't seem to be the case that Jesus is really at the end of the day saying outsiders, not insiders.
Yeah.
But is saying, outsiders and insiders. And you got to be okay with that. But you're exactly right. The people of Nazareth never say that.
Yeah.
The only thing they really say is, isn't this Joseph's son?
Yeah.
Some people have wanted to read that as, just a couple of weeks ago, we had that conversation between Mary and Jesus, the 12-year-old Jesus, about who his father and mother are. We got that. Jesus says, I'm in my father's house, or whatever he says.
Yeah.
Some people have read this as the people of Nazareth attribute Joseph as Jesus' father, meaning that they don't understand that God is really Jesus' father. And that's what Jesus is upset about. I don't really see that in this text, but that's the way some people have made sense of it. Do you have a thought about that one way or another?
I mostly think it's so interesting now to remember that we just got this whole lineage. Luke just gave us a lineage of Jesus that runs through Joseph. And it has in it a little parenthetical that's so it was thought. Luke recognizes that biological complexity. There's a social lineage and then some other kind of lineage. But I am more inclined to read that question, isn't this Joseph's son? If we think Jesus had a negative reaction to that he was reacting to what he perceived as a sense of ownership over him, he is one of ours.
Whatever the people thought at the beginning, they are mad at the end.
They are mad now. Oh man, it's he released a horde of bees into the synagogue. Yeah.
It's the very same people, it seems, who were just like praising him like a few verses ago are now trying to kill him.
Yeah.
How do you reflect on that?
I mean, for as strange as I find it that Jesus just went and sort of picked a fight for a reason that is not clear to me, I also am shocked by the strength and virulence of their response.
Yeah.
I think we could read it as upset that he seems to be saying they've been waiting all this time for the Messiah. I guess I don't even know if they're thinking of him as the Messiah, even as Hebrew Bible means Messiah at this point.
Right.
They've been waiting for someone to come into their people who is going to bring a real time of peace and fulfillment. Jesus just told them, guess what? This is great news. The time is here, and you're going to get nothing out of it.
Yeah.
It's going to affect you in no way. And that is like, that's pretty crummy. That's, if you've been waiting your whole life, you're waiting many generations for this thing and say it's here, but you get nothing.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's fair to say that people wanted all of it for themselves. Like Jesus, I don't think we have any reason to believe that. Although it seems to be what Jesus is arguing. It seems to be the voice in his head that he's arguing against. Can you make sense of the strength of their anger?
I mean, one way to read it is that Jesus is actually right about them.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe just under the surface of their praise of him is exactly this sort of ownership idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that when he takes that away from them, here's the true response.
Yeah.
That's not exactly in the text. But I do think it's possible to read that as like in the long sweep of human history, this is kind of the way that it is. Often, it seems. And in the sweep of the Hebrew Bible, there has been this sort of constant tension of the Torah saying, this is about, everybody, love your neighbor and love the foreigner. And then, the prophets are constantly struggling against people who, want to bring that to their own profit. And so this is like, it's got a history here. And so maybe Jesus is just a little bit saying, this is the way people are. This is the way people have been. This is the way people are going to be. And he's poked the bear a little bit to reveal their true character.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question for us then becomes like, okay, if Jesus poked the bear with us a little bit, like, would we try to chase him off a cliff too? Or something like that.
Yeah, are we only interested in the fulfillment of this scripture if it means something concrete to our own benefit?
And maybe uniquely to our own benefit.
Yeah.
I've always been troubled by Jesus's response here. Like, I mean, yes. Like, I just think, I want Jesus to have given them the benefit of the doubt. But that is not what he has done.
Bobby, why do you think, maybe this is a weird question, but like, why does he go to Nazareth then? Like, why does he go to announce good news and then pick a fight? Like, why doesn't he just, if he's not going to fulfill his mission there, why doesn't he just go where he's going to fulfill his mission?
And the further question is, and given that is true, why does Luke put the story as the very first thing that's going to characterize the whole rest of Jesus's ministry?
Yeah.
We could just have not told this story, Jesus could have not gone there and Luke could have certainly either not told it or just not highlighted it. And so somebody's trying to make a point about, when we, whoever we are, become too comfortable thinking Jesus is one of ours, that's not going to end well for us. Mm-hmm. Jesus is always moving away from the center of oursness toward those who are considered outsiders. And Jesus here is saying, and God has always worked that way, even though we have not always seen it. And he gives us the examples of Elijah and Elisha, but you can also think of the example of Jonah and so on. Mm-hmm. And so this is important, like in and understanding what Jesus is up to in the Gospel of Luke is that Jesus is always going to be moving away from the center of ownership towards some other place. And I think the assumption here is that's going to make us uncomfortable in the same way that made the people of Nazareth uncomfortable, like livid.
Yeah. Murderous. Yeah.
And we've seen that. Mary talked about the overturning of the social order,
Yes.
and
Yes.
Simeon talked about the rise and fall of many. And so here we kind of start to see that, like when you really get a sense of what this gospel is,
Yeah.
it upsets people, and the people it's upsetting are the most inside people you can imagine.
Yeah, and I will also point out that this whole good news to the poor and sort of setting the oppressed free, the year of the Lord's favor that was in Isaiah, they were good with all of that. That kind of churning the system and sort of moving back towards an economic midline.
Yeah.
But also, exactly as you're saying, maybe they weren't expecting it to be so, it's more radical than that.
In the recent election, there was a lot of rhetoric about like, we need to take care of our own before we take care of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's sort of like, they're good with all of that, the setting free of the captives and all of that, but they wanted to start with them. And if there's some left over, then it can go to somebody else. But like, let's start here. And when you frame it that way, then it starts to sound very familiar in our own context too. Like, yeah, of course you want to take care of people close to you before you take care of people far away from you.
Yeah. I was trying to think this morning, Bobby, of what a sort of modern parallel to this story could be. And I was thinking in the world of politics like that, it's a little, I don't know, I got a little turned around trying to think of a concrete example that didn't get kind of weird. But I did think, like, what if there were a political figure that we truly believed could right the systems that we have and help us out of this, way in which we're locked into our sides and all the things that we wish some individual person could do. And they sort of rose to fame and everybody adored them. And then they said, I'm going to India.
Yeah.
Because that's where the highest levels of poverty are.
Yeah.
So peace out. I don't think we'd be throwing them off a cliff, but I think there would be some sense of, wait a minute, like, we have real problems.
Yeah.
We need you.
I like that way of reading. That's a very compassionate way of reading it, as like, there are genuine needs here and in Nazareth. And the fact that there's also needs elsewhere does not mean
that there are not needs here.
Yeah. So yes, I like that a lot. Maybe the last little note I just have about this is that verse 30, he passed through the crowd and went on his way. Like, I've never been entirely clear what that meant. I had a Bible teacher a long time ago who said that maybe Jesus, this was like in a church context, Jesus, because he's divine, he could become invisible. And so he just like disappeared and like walked out.
That'd be amazing.
I think he just like hiked up his robe and like ran as fast as he could. I think Jesus was a little bit like he was quick and he just like dodged his way through the crowd. That's how I read it.
Yeah.
All right, Amy, we have started to gesture a little bit towards how this text might intersect with our world today. What is your takeaway from this text as you're thinking about it in our context?
Gosh, Bobby, I feel like it changed in the last 30 seconds of our conversation. So I'll say first something else that someone from the Bible Worm Collaborative raised up, and I didn't write down their name, unfortunately, but the question of what it means to have this story right after the temptations. And if there is some way in which we ought to think about our own temptation, deal with our temptation to want to go home and be the hero at home.
Yeah.
And sort of live out those expectations that we know so well. And that part of the process of dealing with temptations was Jesus ripping off that Band-Aid right away and saying, I'm just going to blow this up right now because it will be a temptation to me. So it's a really interesting lens for me to think about. But I think more broadly, this question about who are your people and what does that mean? for the work you do in the world is really important. And I don't think that everyone always needs to think universally about everything.
Yeah.
And I also think that being super particularistic or thinking only about our own people or our own neighborhood or our own community, especially as our communities become less and less diverse, is really problematic. And it's something that I struggle with in my own life, but I don't know how to write that. For me, it is not as easy as just saying I relinquish all connection to a particular community and I'm going to be universal, because I don't think it always has to be that way.
Yeah.
I'm not being very articulate here other than circling a question. But that's a question that this text is putting in front of me.
No, Amy, that was really helpful. And the way you're talking about who is in my community is reminding me of a text I think we're going to read here in a couple of weeks, in which, it's the story of the Good Samaritan. And the question that's put to Jesus there is, who is my neighbor? Which is exactly that question. And the answer becomes something like, whoever is in need, that's your neighbor. And it really changes the story a lot if you think like, okay, but if the widow of Zarephath and Naaman the Syrian are also my neighbor, then Jesus isn't actually depriving my community of anything.
Yes.
But it presses that boundary of like, how universal can you think? To me, this passage has one of the most beautiful ideas. Like, I love that this is Jesus's mission statement. Good news to the poor. And I often say this to myself, and I say this to communities that I am involved with, is, if you're trying to measure the ministry that you're doing, is this a ministry of the gospel? The question of like, to what extent is this good news to the poor, what we're doing here in the name of Jesus? If the answer is very much this is good news to the poor, then probably we're doing a Jesus thing. And if the answer is it's not much good news to the poor at all, then maybe we have lost our way a little bit, and we need to rethink how we do the work of the gospel. The fact that this in Luke's gospel is connected with this other passage, like, it makes me like, I wish it were not connected in this way, because it makes me really like uncomfortable with the way Jesus is acting here. But it does highlight a tension that once we have said that the gospel of Jesus Christ is in the first instance about good news to the poor, it really does kind of call into question what it looks like from the perspective of someone like me in the communities that I'm involved with. I am not poor. And so what does it mean to be me in a community that's not poor, proclaiming a gospel that is for the poor? And it's often going to look like, I think, that the weight of the gospel is going to be going towards somebody besides me. And it's going to call me out of my little community towards somebody else. And I may feel like I'm getting deprived sometimes because the good news is not just like coming to me all the time. And maybe that's going to make me want to throw Jesus off a cliff a little bit. So like, I think this connection of these two stories gets at something a little close to home for me, that when we proclaim a gospel that is good news to the people it's supposed to be good news to, we have to find a way of orienting to that allows that to be the way Jesus operates in the world, and not to be angry that more of it's not headed our way.
Yeah.
I think that's what I've got. I think that's where I get to with this passage.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's really helpful. And I guess maybe in the ideal to find some way to include people in that mission.
Right.
Instead of just making them super mad that they're not getting the thing, to show them why. But I can understand that he's pushing back against something that's not articulated here.
Yeah, I think that's right. All right, Amy, next time we are over in Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11, which is the story of Jesus calling his first disciples.
All righty. I look forward to it.
Me too, Amy. I'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.
Thanks
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Join us again next time when we'll discuss Luke 5:1-11, the story of Jesus calling his first disciples. Until then, keep on digging.